He was just a quiet mechanic on the corner, until a SWAT team stormed his driveway. What happened next? 5 words stopped him cold and flipped the system upside down. You won't believe who this man really is. Every Saturday morning, the familiar sound of classic rock echoed from the old radio in Elliot Granger's garage, blending with the steady clinking of tools. On Fairview Crescent, a peaceful neighborhood on the outskirts of town, residents had long grown accustomed to the sight of Mr. Elliot. Neatly trimmed silver hair, bright blue eyes that radiated warmth, hunched over a neighbor's worn-out car with quiet dedication. Everyone knew he could fix anything with an engine, and more importantly, he never said no when someone asked for help. At 66, his hands weren't as quick as they once were, but his meticulous care had never faded. Elliot preferred traditional tools over modern gadgets. To him, every bolt and screw had its own story, one that only patience could reveal. He often joked with the younger guys around the block, those brand new machines might shine, but they don't carry memories like these old ones do. Elliot lived with his wife, Mary Ann, in a modest ranch-style home with white walls and green trim, made charming by the rose bushes Marion lovingly tended in front of the porch. They weren't wealthy, but their home was filled with warmth and love. Neighbors often saw the couple walking hand in hand in the evenings, pausing to chat with anyone they passed. Behind that simple life beat a heart deeply committed to the community. Every Thursday, Elliot volunteered at American Legion Post 92, helping aging veterans fix their wheelchairs or simply sitting and listening to the endless stories of old comrades. For struggling teens at East Ridge High School, Elliot was like a second father, teaching auto repair with remarkable patience, never raising his voice or showing disappointment, no matter how many mistakes they made. On Saturday afternoons, his garage door was always open. Not just neighbors, but even folks from miles away came seeking his help. And most remarkable of all, Elliot never charged a single dime to those in need. Sometimes people would repay him with a homemade loaf of bread, a basket of backyard fruit, or just heartfelt words of thanks. For Elliot, that was more than enough. Everyone thought Mr. Elliot Granger's life on Fairview Crescent revolved solely around fixing cars, volunteering, and enjoying peaceful days with Mary Ann. But that was only the surface, just the part he chose to let the world see. Beneath the worn denim work shirt and grease-streaked hands lay truths he had never shared, not even with those closest to him. 27 years is a long time for a soldier, long enough to see and endure things far beyond what most could imagine. When Elliot finally folded away his uniform and returned to civilian life, he also locked away the secrets he carried. No one in the neighborhood knew he had once been a senior operative, executing classified missions under direct orders from military ranks so high, even insiders rarely spoke their names. All the medals, the priceless mementos from major operations, he kept them hidden in a weathered wooden box, discreetly tucked beneath the floor of his backyard shed. In a shadowed corner of his small workshop, Elliot still kept a photograph that had yellowed with age. It showed him in full combat uniform, standing beside comrades whose faces had been blurred out for security reasons. On sleepless nights, when the entire Fairview Crescent lay in stillness, he would sit for hours before that photo, his gaze lost in memories he had never shared. The ghosts of war didn't release their grip easily, no matter how many years had passed. Sometimes, Mary Ann would wake in the middle of the night, noticing the empty space beside her. She'd find Elliot sitting silently on the porch, his eyes staring into a distant, unseen void. She understood he was wrestling with memories too heavy to speak aloud. In those moments, she would gently place a hand on his shoulder, saying nothing at all. That quiet warmth was the only medicine he ever needed. Elliot had never wanted to boast about his past. It wasn't because he wasn't proud. It was because he knew better than anyone that war wasn't something to glorify with ease. It was a burden he had chosen to bear, one he had no desire to pass on to anyone else. He believed that what he did in Fairview Crescent, however small, was what truly deserved to be honored. Once, a curious young man from a neighborhood named Jackson Miller asked about the faint scar running down Elliot's left arm. Elliot had simply smiled and said it was from a careless slip while fixing a car. But in truth, that scar came from a mission he barely survived. The young man had no idea that behind Elliot's gentle, unassuming presence was a man who had stared down death who had saved lives of people he never met, and never once received a thank you for it. To Elliot, the quiet life he now shared with Marianne on Fairview Crescent was more than a choice. It was salvation. The secrets he held inside were his way of protecting himself and the people he loved from the stormy past he had endured. That was why he only ever wanted to be remembered as a humble mechanic, a kind neighbor. Nothing more, nothing less. That Wednesday afternoon began like any other peaceful day on Fairview Crescent. Elliot was lying beneath Mrs. Eleanor Clayton's old Buick, humming along to Sweet Home Alabama, playing from the radio in the corner of his garage, focused on changing the oil. The warm September sun bathed the pavement in golden light, mixing with the scent of freshly cut grass, a scene as picturesque as any painting. Marian had just left for Maplewood Grocery, eager to catch senior discount day, which she never missed. As Elliot tightened the last bolt, a sudden screech of tires shattered the quiet of the neighborhood. He frowned, a flicker of unease creeping through his chest. Before he could slide out from under the car, a fleet of sleek black SUVs roared to a stop across his driveway, tires grinding the asphalt with menacing hiss. Doors flew open in unison. Boots thundered toward him, and then came a commanding voice. "Police, get on the ground, now!" Elliot rolled out from under the car, his hands still slick with motor oil, raised them high in the air. His eyes flashed with momentary shock as he saw dozens of SWAT officers in full tactical gear, rifles aimed squarely at him. "You've got the wrong guy," Elliot began, trying to keep his voice calm, but he was quickly cut off by the cold barrel of a rifle held by a young officer, visibly trembling with a mix of adrenaline and tension. "Silence! Get on your knees now," the officer barked. Slowly, Elliot dropped to his knees, feeling the cold of the pavement press against his face as they pinned him down and zip-tied his wrists. From the corner of his eye, he caught sight of curious neighbors starting to gather, whispering and watching the chaos unfold. Among them was Jackson Miller, awkwardly filming the scene on his phone like he'd stumbled upon a Hollywood action movie playing out on his front lawn. Amid the growing commotion, Marianne's car turned into the driveway. She stepped out, arms full of grocery bags, her face stricken with confusion at the sight before her. "Elliot, what's going on?" Immediately, 3 officers swung around, weapons drawn and pointed directly at her. "Drop the bags and put your hands up," came a sharp command. I just came back from the store," Marian stammered, her trembling hands trying to lower the bags to the ground. One young officer, growing impatient, shouted with rising agitation, "She's not complying. Last warning, drop them now." "Wait, she has arthritis." Elliot yelled from where he lay on the ground, desperate to explain, but his voice was drowned out by the shouts and chaos all around. The young officer lost control. He pulled his taser and fired directly at Marianne. The electric jolt ripped through her body, causing her to convulse violently. Grocery bags exploded on the pavement. Eggs shattered, apples rolled across the driveway, and milk spilled in a wide, glistening puddle. Marianne collapsed like a puppet with its strings cut. Elliot felt his heart clench. The pain in his wrist from the zip ties was nothing compared to the storm of fury erupting inside him. A knee pressed hard into his back as another officer snarled down at him. "Stay down, old man, or you're next." A smoldering fire lit behind Elliot's eyes, but he didn't speak. He simply turned his gaze toward the officer in command standing nearby, waiting for the moment they would realize just how colossal a mistake they had made. Just a few dozen feet away, Jackson Miller kept filming. His face was a mixture of shock and morbid fascination, as if he couldn't believe a real-life movie scene was playing out right there on tranquil Fairview Crescent. Elliot knew then this footage would become something no one in the neighborhood would ever forget. The only difference was, unlike the action movies Jackson loved, what was unfolding before him was real, and the consequences would go far beyond spilled milk and broken eggs on concrete. Elliot knew the mistake made today would come to light soon enough, but he also understood this was only the beginning of a chain of events that would forever alter the peaceful life he had worked so hard to preserve. Marianne Granger lay motionless on the pavement, her body curled in on itself, arms still clutching her chest as if trying to shield herself, even though the current had stopped. Her glasses had flown off, one lens shattered. Elliot felt like his heart was being crushed in a vice. But he didn't scream. He didn't thrash or curse. Instead, he took a deep breath, long and steady, and fixed his gaze cold and steely on the officer in command just a few paces away. "She's my wife," Elliot said, his voice low and firm, yet clear enough to make the entire SWAT team freeze for a split second. "She just came back from the store. She has arthritis. And you just assaulted a 63-year-old unarmed woman right in front of me." The young officer, Connor Blake, the one who had pulled the trigger on the taser, stood frozen like a statue, his eyes wide with panic, as if even he couldn't believe what he'd done. Sweat dotted his forehead, clinging to the edge of his helmet. She wasn't complying," Connor stammered. I gave her a warning." "A warning isn't a death sentence for someone unarmed and slow to move," Elliot replied, his eyes never leaving Commander Nolan Carter. "You got the wrong house, and the wrong man." The commander opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to offer an excuse or some justification, but he was cut off. A loud click echoed from behind them. Every rifle swung toward the sound. But it wasn't gunfire. It was the sound of a door unlocking next door, at the home of their new teenage neighbor, a 15-year-old boy named Jalen. In his hands was a remote control drone, the LED light still blinking. Jalen stepped onto the porch, confused by the chaos, one headphone still hanging off his ear. But Elliot knew exactly what the boy had done. A moment earlier, he'd caught sight of that drone hovering low across the street. Just before everything erupted, Elliot blinked just once. Then slowly, he turned back to the commander. "If you need evidence, the flycam next door recorded everything." The SWAT team stirred. One officer quickly stepped back and murmured into a radio. Commander Carter clenched his jaw, but the color drained from his face. It wasn't just that they'd stormed the wrong house and used unnecessary force. They had been recorded from a third-party angle, capturing the entire incident. A suffocating silence settled over the scene. The only sound now was the hurried footsteps of a paramedic racing over from the emergency vehicle parked behind them. Elliot wasn't in a rush. Though still bound, he knelt close beside Mary Ann, placing trembling fingers on her neck to check her pulse. Not from fear, but from the effort it took to keep his rising fury under control. "Weak, but steady," he whispered. "She needs medical attention. Immediately. I'm requesting you release my hands. Right now." The commander hesitated, eyes darting to his subordinates, who were all now glancing anxiously at one another. Finally, he gave a slight nod. Another officer stepped forward and quickly sliced through the zip ties with a utility knife. Elliot stood up, slowly but steadily, as if he hadn't just been forced to the ground. He adjusted his collar, then looked Commander Carter straight in the eye. "Now," he said, "I'm only going to say this once." His gaze was sharp as a blade, his voice solid as stone. "Call General Brigg. Now." The entire SWAT team froze. Those 5 words hit the air like an order from a rank none of them could quite comprehend. And even though they didn't know how an old mechanic could possibly know that name, they didn't dare laugh. Not after what had just happened. Not after they had accidentally assaulted the wife of a man they clearly didn't truly understand. The moment those 5 words fell from Elliot Granger's mouth, the air around Fairview Crescent thickened. "Call General Brigg. Now." He didn't shout. There was no roar, but the calmness in his tone struck the entire team like a bolt of lightning down their spines. Commander Nolan Carter narrowed his eyes at the silver-haired man standing calmly amid the chaos, his hands still smelling faintly of motor oil, yet speaking with command that made even the armored officers instinctively straighten their spines. One young officer nearby scoffed under his breath. "We're handling a high-level operation here, not playing Cold War pretend." "Shut up," Carter snapped, voice suddenly sharp. "Do you even know what the name Brigg means?" The officer went silent. Beads of sweat formed on his temples. The atmosphere now felt like a ticking bomb. A seasoned soldier among them, Sergeant Dylan Pierce, stepped forward, slowly removing his helmet, eyes fixed on Elliot as if trying to piece together something long buried in the back of his mind from training days long past. "I've heard that name," Pierce said quietly, "in advanced tactical courses. Brigg is a black-level commander, Almost no public records. They say if he makes a call, even the Pentagon has to listen. And if a civilian knows who he is, then... Carter didn't finish his sentence before Pierce's eyes suddenly widened with recognition. Wait a minute, Granger? Elliot Granger? He stared at Elliot like he'd seen a ghost. Elliot didn't answer. He simply gave a patient nod, as if waiting for the other man's memory to complete the puzzle on its own. And sure enough, Sergeant Pierce stepped back, his voice barely a whisper. Oh my God! He's the one who wrote Handbook 12.9, the Manual on Civilian Engagement in Hybrid Tactical Environments. I studied that. Every ops unit studied that. A heavy silence fell over all of Fairview Crescent. The team's radio still crackled with static, but no one was listening anymore. Every eye was locked on the man they had assumed was just a local mechanic, now revealed to be the eye of a growing psychological storm. Captain, an officer murmured into his headset. Check the address. I just got the fly cam footage from next door. This is 3922 Fairview Crescent. The actual suspect is on Fairview Avenue, different zip code. Commander Carter looked like he'd swallowed a stone. He exhaled sharply, then turned to the operations coordinator. Re-verify the ID, entire household, and initiate direct contact with command center. Elliot crossed his arms, his gaze fixed steadily on Carter. "An inside pocket of my coat," he said. "Left side. There's something you should see." Now visibly shaking, Carter gestured for an officer to move in. Gloved hands carefully reached into Elliot's coat and pulled out a small, solid metallic object, worn with time, a badge bearing the image of a black eagle clutching two crossed spears, the insignia reserved for elite operatives under black protocol. Dylan Pierce immediately spoke up. "That's not standard military insignia. That's level our clearance." Everyone froze. Commander Carter swallowed hard, then turned to the communications officer. "Emergency line. Secure channel. General Max Brigg. Now!" Behind him, medics were still tending to Mary Ann. Jalen, the boy with the drone, stood frozen on his porch, mouth agape as if realizing he just filmed something worth 1,000,000 views. And Elliot, he stood perfectly still. His eyes, icy and piercing, said everything. No threats, no orders. The 5 words he had spoken still hung heavy in the air, and no one dared question them anymore, because once a man knows the name Brigg, and is known by Brigg himself, what happened here is no longer a simple case of mistaken identity. It becomes a strategic stain, a political bomb. And that bomb had just started ticking. The encrypted call to command center lasted only 47 seconds. That was all it took for the tide to turn. Commander Nolan Carter, who just an hour ago had led the raid like he was storming a terrorist cell, now stood frozen. Phone still pressed his ear, face drained of all color. On the other end, the low, firm voice of General Max Brigg rang out like a reckoning bell. "If you're standing at 3922 Fairview Crescent, then you're pointing weapons at the man who saved 3 presidents you've never even been cleared to stand near. Hang up." Click. Carter slowly lowered the phone and turned to face Elliot Granger, the man they once casually referred to as the old mechanic. No one dared utter that title now. "Mr. Granger," Carter said, his voice now a full octave lower. "I, on behalf of my team, I apologize." Elliot didn't respond. He was kneeling beside Mary Ann, gently pulling a handkerchief from his coat pocket to dab the sweat from her brow. His eyes never left his wife. He offered only a cold, measured reply. An apology doesn't reduce the voltage of a taser. Dylan Pierce stood nearby, still visibly shaken. He stared down at the black protocol clearance badge in his hand, as if holding an artifact from another world. "You're Elliot Granger, R.J. Granger? You wrote Civilian Protocol 19. We studied that in the advanced course. You're the one who authored the very rules we just completely violated this afternoon." Elliot gave a subtle nod, his eyes now sharp as a cleaver's edge. "I wrote it," he said. "Not so you could toss in the trash every time someone's skin looks different or their reflexes are slow because of age." Carter stepped back, visibly unsettled. "We received intelligence that a high-level drug suspect was at this location. You received what? Elliot looked up, his first time locking eyes with Carter. A vague address, an unverified name, and you showed up here with 4 SUVs, 12 armed men, and egos too large to contain. You didn't come with a warrant. You came needing someone to validate your authority. And today, that someone was my wife. Behind them, a young officer awkwardly tried to gather the scattered apples back into a grocery bag, an absurd gesture, as if trying to fix the damage. One apple rolled slowly to Sergeant Dylan Pierce's boot. He bent down, picked it up, and stared at it for a long moment before muttering, "We were never trained for the moment the person we respect most catches us in the act." Carter stood frozen. His radio still crackled faintly, but no one was listening anymore. Jalen, the boy with the drone, and Jackson Miller with his old phone were both still recording, hands shaking but eyes locked onto the history unfolding on their front lawns. Elliot placed a hand on Mary Ann's chest, feeling her heartbeat slowly steady. Then he stood, calmly adjusting his collar. "I don't need anyone in cuffs," he said, not with rage, but with a chilling, quiet finality. "I just need you to remember today. Remember this failure. Remember how one bad decision can wipe out an entire career good." A long silence lingered. "Now then," Elliot continued, his gaze razor-sharp, "I want all of you off my property. Now, immediately." And this time, no one argued. The black protocol badge still lay on the hood of the car, glinting in the setting sun like an indelible reminder. There were no more shouted commands. No more boots pounding against the concrete of Fairview Crescent. Just a heavy stillness, caught between exposed pride on one side and an unforgivable truth on the other. "Officer Connor Blake." Elliot called out the name of the man who had fired on Mary Ann. His voice wasn't raised, but it rang through the hollow street like a church bell at dusk. Connor turned, face pale, his steps faltering as if the ground beneath him had started to crumble. He tried to speak, but his dry lips couldn't form sound. Elliot stepped closer, just half an arm's length away. "Look at me, son," he said slowly. "Tell me what you saw, a drug dealer or an old man picking up broken eggs for his wife." Connor didn't answer. His eyes welled up. After several seconds of tormenting silence, he quietly removed his face shield, unstrapped his body armor, then placed his gun and badge on the hood of the command vehicle. No one told him to. No one forced him. But he knew. He had just ended his own career with a single, unnecessary pull of the trigger. "I'm sorry," Connor said, voice cracked and low. "I know. I didn't look closely enough." Elliot gave a small nod. He didn't need more words. Just then, from the end of the block, a black sedan with no police insignia rolled quietly to a stop. The door opened, and the moment the man stepped out, the entire scene seemed to freeze all over again. General Max Brigg. No uniform, no bodyguards. Just a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit, and the steady gait of someone who had seen more battlefields and medals on any headquarters wall. Brigg didn't look at anyone except Elliot. "Granger," he said, his voice rough as whetstone, "I heard what happened and came immediately. I hope I'm not too late." Elliot shook his hand, a firm, deliberate handshake, not long, but powerful enough to make everyone nearby hold their breath. Brigg then turned to Commander Nolan Carter and asked coldly, "You gave the order?" "Yes, sir. But..." "No, but..." Brigg cut him off. Wrong address, wrong protocol, wrong team, and above all, the wrong man. Brigg pulled a thin folder from his inner coat pocket, stamped in red, classified Directive 14B. He handed it to Carter. "Inside is your temporary suspension order pending internal investigation, effective as of 5 minutes ago." Carter's face turned pale. He lowered his head, offering no resistance. Brigg then turned toward Mary Ann, who was still being attended to by a paramedic on a folding chair. He approached and bowed his head. "Mrs. Granger, on behalf of the entire system, I offer my deepest apologies." Marion gave a faint, weary smile, not to him, but to Elliot, who had never let go of her hand, a steady anchor through the storm. Jalen, the boy with the drone, whispered to Jackson Miller, still filming with his old phone, "Who is Mr. Elliot, anyway? Is he, like, A superhero or something. Jackson replied quietly, his eyes never leaving the frame. Not a superhero. He's the kind of man superheroes stand at attention for. And in that moment, no one on Fairview Crescent saw Elliot Granger as just an old mechanic anymore. They saw the stillness of true power. A man who didn't need to shout, didn't need a weapon, yet brought an entire system to its knees. And the consequences, though late, had arrived. General Max Briggs stood in the middle of Elliot Granger's front yard, his charcoal suit unwrinkled despite stepping out under the blazing September sun. The remaining officers had stepped well back. No one dared intrude on the space between two men who had written the unnamed chapters of American military history. Briggs reached into his inner pocket once more and pulled out a sealed envelope, closed with red wax and bearing a metallic military insignia. "Granger," he said, his eyes no longer those of superior, but of someone who had fought beside him. "This is a reactivation order under priority code. It includes independent command authority, black protocol privileges, and full access to the domestic defense satellite grid." Elliot glanced at the envelope. He didn't reach for it. "Max," he said quietly, "I left that life a long time ago. I chose Fairview Crescent. I chose Mary Ann. I chose a garage that smells like oil and plays classic rock. And most of all, I chose not to become the man I used to be." Briggs tightened his grip on the envelope and nodded, clearly expecting the answer, yet unable to completely hide his disappointment. "The world isn't any safer, Elliot. We still need men like you, the ones who know when not to pull the trigger." Elliot gave a faint smile. It was quiet, understated, but enough to make even the distant SWAT officers feel small. "I understand," he replied, "but right now, I need to take care of the brake system on Mr. Clayton's Ford F-150 before he ends up rolling down the hill next week." The tension in the air eased slightly, broken by a soft chuckle from Jalen, the boy with the drone, still standing on the porch next door. "If Mr. Elliot goes back into the military," he said, "none of us would have anyone left to teach us how to fix cars." Elliot turned his head, leaning slightly. "That's right, kid. And who's going to teach you how to tune a spark plug by ear instead of Googling it, huh?" Briggs burst into laughter, a rare, genuine laugh from a man who carried a nation's weight on his shoulders. He placed a sealed envelope on the wooden railing of the porch, adjusted his jacket, and began to walk away. "The order still stands, Elliot. If you ever feel the world needs you, just open it." Elliot watched the general's firm steps retreat toward the car. He didn't say anything, but once Briggs had gotten inside, Elliot turned, looked at the envelope again. He didn't open it. Instead, he took a small magnet and pinned it to the tool cabinet in his garage. "I'm not rejecting responsibility," he whispered, quiet enough for only himself to hear. "I'm just choosing a different way to serve." That afternoon, after the response team had withdrawn from Fairview Crescent and the last curious glances from neighbors faded behind their curtains, Elliot made 2 cups of hot tea, one for himself, one for Mary Ann, who was now awake and smiling gently from her armchair. He set the cups down, sat beside her, and let out a long exhale, not from exhaustion, but because he knew he had just turned down a path of power to preserve something far more precious: peace. And outside, once again, the garage filled with the sound of classic rock and the familiar metallic clinks of tools. Elliot Granger, the man who once wrote the rules for those who carry weapons, had returned to teaching the next generation how to tighten bolts with the right touch. 2 weeks after the incident at Fairview Crescent, a press conference was held at the Allen Creek Police Department headquarters. Behind the podium were rows of national and state flags and a freshly hung banner that read, 5 words protocol, the power of restraint. Before the press cameras, Police Chief Samuel Holden held a prepared statement, speaking with measured, steady tones. "Starting today, all Allen Creek Rapid Response Units will be required to undergo a new 8-week training program focused on 3 core pillars: address verification, accurate situational assessment, and respect for human dignity. We're calling it the 5 words protocol." No one had to mention Elliot Granger by name, but everyone knew he was the reason change had come. The video Jackson Miller captured was still circulating widely across social media, always paired with a now legendary quote, "Call General Briggs right now." Those 5 words had now become a symbol, not power, but the necessary boundaries to power. Inside his garage, Elliot was teaching a group of students from East Ridge High School how to change a car's brake pads. On the whiteboard behind him, someone had scrawled in marker, "Respect before judgment." One student hesitantly asked, "Mr. Elliot, did you know your videos got over 8 million views now?" Elliot just gave a soft chuckle, eyes still focused on tightening the brake rotor. "Fame fades quickly," he said, "but kindness, if planted the right way, stays around for a long time." The room fell silent, and in that quiet, the real lesson began. By late fall, Fairview Crescent grew quieter than usual. Maple leaves blanketed the yard of 3,922, where one silver-haired man could still be seen each morning sweeping the walkway, brewing tea, and playing classic rock in his garage. Elliot Granger was no longer an unfamiliar name, but he never once used his newfound recognition for personal gain. He still fixed Mrs. Eleanor Clayton's car for free at the end of every month. He still spent Tuesdays teaching trade skills to East Ridge students. And he still walked Marion down their peaceful street every evening, the place they had called home for over 3 decades. One early winter morning, a young officer knocked on the garage door. He was a new recruit at the Allen Creek precinct, freshly graduated from the 5 words protocol training course. "Mr. Granger," he said, nervously holding an old wrench, "they told me to come here. I want to learn from you. Not how to hold a weapon, but how to stay calm when others lose control." Elliot looked at him for a moment, then smiled. He didn't answer right away, just gestured toward the old car with its hood popped open. "Come on in. Grip a wrench right, and it never slips." The young man stepped forward, eyes lighting up like a student meeting their first real teacher. That day, and many days after, Elliot didn't speak much, but everything he did carried a different kind of weight, the strength that didn't need force to be felt and didn't need vengeance to prove anything. When a local reporter once asked why he didn't sue, didn't lash out, and why he ended an entire crisis with just 5 words, Elliot simply shrugged. Because those 5 words were bigger than fear, and some wounds only grace can heal. Then he turned back to his tools, continuing the day's work as usual. Because to Elliot Granger, the thing most worth being proud of was never his past as a legendary operative. It was the present, where he chose to be a quiet teacher, a devoted husband, and a kind man in a world too full of noise.